What, in your view, having sat next to the president, having known all the secrets of state that there are to know, having worked with the most powerful man on the face of the earth, what does it do to a human being to have that kind of power, as opposed to those who are totally powerless, as you saw them in prison?
Well, you see, you got to approach that question from several different perspectives. The first perspective is that, as a young political idealist, having worked in politics and government and in and out of campaigns all of my life, to arrive in the White House and to have the band playing Hail to the Chief and the flags furling and the crowds cheering and people around saying yes sir, no sir, well, nobody ever says no sir, they always say yes sir, an aide outside your door at all time, the ability to pick up a telephone and have a 4-engine jet waiting at Andrews Air Force Base, to generals and admirals saluting, the aura of power, the trappings of power, are inherently corrupting. I went in there determined, at great sacrifice. I'd left a very successful law practice, lucrative law practice, determined to pass laws, to change things in the country, to bring my political views to bear.
You were not a Christian at that time.
I was not a Christian, but I went out of a sense of duty. And I now look back and realize how that aura of power that surrounded us began to warp your views. You began to feel you were a little bit above the law. You began to feel that you could do almost anything because your goals were so noble. As a matter of fact, self-righteousness was for me a real problem. Now, that's looking at power in one dimension. That's looking at what the aura or the trappings of power do to people. There's another dimension to power that I think is really pertinent to the times in which we live, and that is that there is the aura or the appearance of power or the illusion of power, but it isn't real power. One of the things that led to my conversion was when I walked out of the White House, I realized that most of the problems I'd worked on when I started in government were worse when I left than when I began. I realized that while I thought I was influencing things, most of the battles that I fought were with the Congress over who would have control over a particular program or what we were going to put in the budget. And I realized that the power of government is vastly overrated. And it led to sort of an emptiness in my own life because I was thinking I've devoted my life to this and it really hasn't mattered all that much. And that was one of the things God used to begin to soften my heart to look for the real values of life, which is the power of the King of Kings living in us, the eternal values of God, which are so transcendent to the momentary battles and power struggles of man. That's what so excites me about the ministry I'm in, because it gets people, lay people, involved doing something with their Christian faith. And it shatters the political illusion. And we Christians in particular have got to look at things right now in perspective in this an election year, and it's very important we register and vote and get into politics. But don't do it with the illusion that government is going to solve all of our problems. We're going to win some battles there, but the kingdom of God, the battle for the kingdom of God goes on in the hearts of men.
This subject absolutely fascinates me because it's very much related to the profession that I've chosen, and I see it in newborns. Research is pretty clear on this, that the first day home, the first day after birth, a child reaches out for the manipulation and the control of the adults that are around him. Mm-hmm. The very first day, every mother knows this, but it took the researchers all these years to come up with it. But there is a desire for power, being defined as the ability to control yourself, your circumstances, and other people, built into human nature. And the interesting thing is that the more you get, the more you want. It is never satiated. It's not like a good meal that's been fixed and you eat it and for a while you're not hungry anymore, but it's just a bottomless well.
Mm-hmm. Well, power is destructive in the sense that the more you have, the more you have to have. And, of course, that's what leads people to start out often with relatively noble motives, but then the constant desire for more power, for more adulation, for more ego-stroking, leads them to more and more extreme measures. And that's how you see empires degenerate.
Was that the downfall of the Nixon administration?
In part it was. In part it was because we were in a constant battle for power against the press and the Congress, and particularly against the press. And so we had declared war, and they saw us gaining power over them, and we saw them gaining power over us. And Agnew declared war on the media, and they weren't going to be satisfied until they had wiped us out. It was a giant power struggle, and we lost. But I think the problem with power is one that affects everybody. I think it affects the shop steward who bullies his employees. I think it affects the mother who tries to dominate her children too much. I think it affects the businessman who is arrogant towards the people that he has under him. I think it affects the pastor who tries to play God. I think it affects every aspect of our lives. It is not just government officials. When you look at power, don't sit back, folks who are listening on the radio, and say, well, that doesn't involve me. It sure does involve you. It involves your most intimate human relationships.
You and me, Chuck, in visible public ministries like we're in. What are the dangers to us?
We're in, I guess, as dangerous a position as anybody can be in. And after the National Religious Broadcasters, there was a press conference, and I had a press conference because I'd given the opening night address. And there was a man from a secular newspaper sitting in the front row. And the first question, he said, Mr. Colson, aren't born-again Christians supposed to be loving and caring for one another? I said, yes. Compassionate for the world, he said. And I said, absolutely. He said, well, I don't understand. He said, I've walked around these exhibits here at this convention. And he said, seems to me the bigger the exhibit, the more arrogant the person who's manning the exhibit. And I defended my brethren. I said, look, they've gotten into this business because it's a ministry, it's God's calling, and many of them have started on a shoestring, and they're building up their ministries, and they're proud of it, and that's an understandable human reaction. And then he began to describe the various things that different people had said to him at the different exhibits, and I was, again, defending my brethren, but at the same time I was cringing inside because I knew exactly what he was talking about. And it was kind of interesting. After the press conference, I went over and I talked to him, and I said, look, don't judge all Christians by some of us who can't handle power. I said, any more than I'll judge all people in the media by some of the things that you folks do. And he said to me, I'm a recovering alcoholic, Mr. Colson. And he said, I really was asking those questions because I'm searching. But he said this. He said, I run into an awful arrogance among people in Christian ministry. And he's right. The idea of reaching into millions of homes, as we're doing right now, is a very awesome thing. And running big ministries, and particularly for people who know what Christ teaches, and suddenly we have all this power. Now, I wrestle with it. I have a terrible time. Pride was my sin. Pride was what drove me all my life. The most deceitful thing is our man's own heart. And so I'm not sure I can ever be honest with myself. I try to be. I ask my friends to be honest. I read all the critical mail that comes to our ministry. I can't read all the mail that comes in, but any letter of criticism has to come to me. I want people to tell me. I ask them to. I go out of my way looking for them to tell me because I know I won't see it in myself, and I know it was the deadly snare of my life when I was in politics, and I'm scared of it. But I believe this is God's call, and I got to sort of like Jonah be the reluctant prophet who goes and does what God calls, hoping and praying I can forestall the inevitability of my own pride and ego getting in the way. And the only way I'm able to deal with that is to get out of the public light for a while. I just have to go off for a couple of weeks and study and read and not get that. I don't ever walk on an airplane or into an airplane terminal or a restaurant or invariably people will come and talk to me, and it's always very nice and it's wonderful. But I fight this.
That's power.
That's power. Sure it is. And it's inevitable in some senses, and we have to deal with it. Everybody has to deal with it in their lives. Everybody has power. A parent has power over his children. The question is how you deal with it. Now, power is not inherently evil.
It's what it does to you.
It's what it does to you. Power is inherently corrupting, but not inherently evil. Power comes from God.